So I come across this scenario a lot. Clients looking at whether it's worth it to dive into property investment. Let's say they've bought a home 10 years ago, they've got a bit of equity. Does it make sense? Is it worth the pain, the effort, the cash flow? We're going to drill down into some numbers and look at what happens if you fast forward things about 10 years. So let's just kind of lay down the guidelines here. There's some assumptions here that I want to be upfront about. First of all, imagine we are looking at someone who has the equity in their home to invest with $0 deposit using the existing equity on a 700 grand property, assuming a long-term capital gain, long-term average of 6%, and also the rent obviously is subject to inflation, and we're going to just put only some expenses in here, rates and insurance, for example, right? And we'll probably work with about 6 grand for rates and insurance a year, just to give a feel. And a rent, incoming rent, say on day one, $600 per week. Okay, so if we fast forward those numbers, how do they look? Okay, so in terms of the initial phase, what you're going to feel is, in terms of cash flow, it's not going to be nice, right? So initially, something like this, we are dealing with interest only for the first 5 years, but even then you're looking at about $400, $500 a week at the peak for this type of thing over the first 10 years. It's going to be a grind. Now, there is some things you can do to make this more affordable, and that is like looking at your own home and whether that mortgage can be stretched, or payments lowered on that to accommodate this type of thing. Why would you do that? Well, let's have a look at the increase in equity. So starting out zero, because you put $0 down, you borrowed the whole amount, 100% finance, because you use the equity in the existing home. Now, 10 years later, how much have you gained? At a 6% annual inflation, averaged out, about $330,000. Okay, if you're planning, say, to retire 15, 16, 20 years, suddenly at that point, your gain in that, from that one property, and we're not talking about the owner-occupied equity here, we're just talking about the $700,000 home. The gain in equity obviously can be quite substantial over the next 10 to 15 years. So you can see why people would still look at property investment quite seriously for retirement. You have to get a good handle, obviously, on your cash flow. It isn't easy, especially at the moment with interest rates being high. This is assuming, this cash flow graphs here is assuming an interest rate average of roughly just over around 6%. Okay, now we don't know what the long-term average interest rates are going to be. Why does it start to look better? Well, first of all, this is as the rent is also subject to inflation. Okay, so initially, let's say that cash flow is a little bit easier as it's interest only for the first 5 years. After that point, if it was to go into principal and interest payments, then the cash flow would begin a little bit more painful, and then obviously that changes as the rent increases on that property. So yeah, hopefully this has kind of given you some insight. Now, we are able to extrapolate some of these numbers for your personal situation as well. So if you're keen on looking at your own situation, you're thinking about these numbers, feel free to reach out to us and the team, mortgagesonline.co.nz, and we can set up a consult around this type of thing. Thank you for watching. Hamish from mortgagesonline.co.nz.